I never liked going to the grocery store late at night. There's something about those empty aisles, the dull hum of the fluorescent lights, and the lifeless quiet that makes the place feel different. Almost like it exists outside of time, a pocket of unreality where anything could happen. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But sometimes you don't have a choice. That night, it was past midnight when I pulled into the Fairway Market parking lot. I had been putting off this trip for days, telling myself I could get by with what little coffee and printer ink I had left, but deadlines had a way of creeping up on you. And of course, I had to run this errand when I was dead tired, my head buzzing from too much screen time and too little sleep. The parking lot stretched out before me, vast and mostly empty, like some abandoned relic of a forgotten time. A few scattered cars sat under the dim glow of streetlights, their long shadows twisting across the cracked pavement. The neon Fairway Market sign flickered intermittently, buzzing in the silence. It should have been comforting, the bright lights, the illusion of safety, but instead it just made the darkness around me seem deeper. I stepped out of my car and the sound of the door slamming shut echoed unnaturally across the lot. A strange, suffocating silence followed. No wind, no distant hum of passing cars, just stillness. I shivered, rubbing my arms as I locked the door and instinctively glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, just shadows. Shaking it off, I started toward the store, my footsteps the only sound cutting through the silence. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. I'd been here 100 times before. It was just a late-night grocery run, nothing more. But as I walked, a prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck, like I was being watched. That was when I heard it. A faint rustling. My steps faltered and my eyes flicked toward the far end of the parking lot, where rows of empty cars stood like silent sentinels. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. From behind a dented sedan, a man emerged. He stepped out slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for me. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair unkempt and wild, sticking up in uneven tufts. His face was hollow, pale under the sickly yellow streetlights, and his eyes, bloodshot and too wide, locked onto mine with a strange intensity. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Maybe longer. I swallowed, my heartbeat accelerating. Just another late-night shopper, I told myself. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he was just off. Not dangerous, just a little lost. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too knowing. Like he was in on some secret I didn't understand. I kept walking, pretending not to notice him. But as I passed, he took a step forward, closing the gap between us. "Hey," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been yelling for hours. I stiffened. "You got a minute?" I didn't. I really didn't. "Sorry," I mumbled, keeping my pace steady. "I'm in a hurry." But he took another step, his eyes never leaving mine. No, just a second," he insisted. His voice was rough, uneven, like he was struggling to hold on to something slipping through his grasp. "I need to ask you something." The way he said it sent a cold spike of fear through me. He wasn't asking for anything. He was demanding my attention. I should have ignored him, should have kept walking, but some part of me, the part that didn't want to be rude, that didn't want to assume the worst, stopped. Big mistake. "Yeah?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. He closed the distance between us, too close now, the smell of sweat and alcohol thick in the air between us. My stomach churned as I took a step back, but he matched me, his gaze never wavering. "What time is it?" he asked. I frowned. That was it? I glanced at my phone, my fingers tense around the edges. "It's 12:15, I said. My voice was barely steady. He nodded slowly, his lips twitching into a smile. 12:15, he repeated, almost to himself. "That's a good time, a real good time." My unease curdled into something colder. I took another step back. "All right, well..." His hand shot out, grabbing my sleeve. A tight, clammy grip. Not just holding, clutching. I froze. "You can't leave," he whispered, his voice shaking now. "You don't understand." I could barely breathe. "Who?" I managed to croak. "Who's watching?" His eyes darted toward the cars, his grip tightening. "Them," he hissed. "The ones in the shadows." My brain screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. He was crazy, unhinged, dangerous. I forced a nervous laugh, trying to keep my voice light. Okay, hope you get some help, man. I yanked my arm free with more force than necessary and practically jogged toward the store. I could feel his eyes on me the entire way. The store's automatic doors whooshed open and I stepped into the bright, sterile interior. The overwhelming hum of fluorescent lights filled my ears, but I didn't feel safe. Not really. I grabbed a cart, my hands shaking, trying to focus on my list. Coffee, printer ink, snacks. Just get what you need and leave. But as I turned down an aisle, something caught my eye. A figure, standing at the end of the row. Him. I gasped. He wasn't looking at the shelves, wasn't even pretending to shop. He was looking at me. Cold sweat prickled my forehead. I turned on my heel, moving faster now, my heart hammering. Get what you need and leave. I rushed through checkout, fumbling with the self-scan, my hands barely functioning. Finally, I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit. I didn't want to think about where he was, didn't want to look. But as soon as I stepped outside, I saw him, standing by the parked cars, waiting. I booked it to my car, my keys already in hand. I unlocked the door, practically throwing myself inside and slamming it shut. My hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled the key, finally jamming it into the ignition. Then, a thud. My entire body seized as I looked up. He was at my window, his face was twisted, his mouth moving in incoherent muttering, his fists pounding against the glass. Open the door. He screamed, "They're coming!" I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching, heart hammering, throat dry. He chased after me, his arms flailing wildly. I didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't breathe until I was miles away. Even now I can still hear his voice. They're coming. I don't know who he was talking about. I don't want to know. I never went back to that store, and I never go grocery shopping alone at night. Not anymore. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. What was I supposed to say? That some unhinged guy in the parking lot gave me the worst scare of my life? That I still hear his voice in my head? They're coming. It was probably nothing. A drunk, a schizophrenic, someone who'd lost his mind to the streets. But it stuck with me. I told myself I was being paranoid, but every time I set foot in a grocery store after that, my eyes flicked to the doors, to the aisles, to the shadows between shelves where someone could be standing, watching. I told myself it was stupid. Until it wasn't. I wasn't even thinking about that night when I stopped by Bright Mart after work. It was just a quick run. I needed milk, eggs, maybe something frozen to throw in the oven. It had been a long shift at the bar, my feet ached, and all I wanted was to go home, eat, and sleep. The store was quiet, the way I liked it. No frantic weekend shoppers, no screaming kids. Just a few scattered people pushing carts under the sterile glow of the overhead lights. I grabbed a basket and started down the aisles, moving on autopilot. I was halfway through the frozen section when I felt it. A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like stepping into a space where someone had been standing just moments before. I glanced up from the glass doors, and that's when I saw him. At the end of the aisle, half hidden behind a display of microwave dinners, stood a man in a gray hoodie. He wasn't browsing, he wasn't even pretending to look at anything, he was just standing there, watching me. I looked away fast, my stomach twisting. Coincidence, I told myself. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was lost in thought. I grabbed a bag of frozen vegetables and turned into the next aisle. When I looked up, he was there again, standing at the end of the row, just far enough to seem like it might be a coincidence, but close enough that my skin prickled. I swallowed hard. Okay, no big deal. People walk the same aisles all the time. Maybe he just had the same shopping path as me, but something about the way he stood, motionless, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed straight ahead, made my stomach tighten. I turned into another aisle. He was there. Another. There. My heart thumped against my ribs, my breath coming quicker. This wasn't random. He was following me. I tightened my grip on the basket, forcing myself to stay calm. Don't panic, just get to checkout, get to the car, get out of here. I took a sharp turn into an empty aisle, my pace quickening. My mind raced. Should I confront him? Should I ask an employee for help? No. I didn't want to look weak, didn't want to escalate things. Maybe I was overreacting. I reached the checkout lanes and forced myself to breathe. Brightmart had self-checkout. Perfect. No awkward small talk, no fumbling with cashiers. I scanned my items fast, my hands shaking as I tapped my card against the reader. Almost done. Almost safe. A shadow moved in my peripheral vision. I turned my head. He was standing at the exit. My stomach dropped. He wasn't even pretending now. He was waiting for me. A cold, crawling dread wrapped around my ribs. I forced myself to grab my bags and walk, not run, toward the doors. My car was just a few rows away. I could make it. The doors slid open with that familiar whoosh, and I stepped into the parking lot. Footsteps. Behind me. I walked faster. My pulse thudded against my skin. Don't look back. Don't look back. I had to look back. He was following me. His pace was steady, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. My car was in sight. Just a few more steps. My keys were already in my hand, my fingers trembling as I pressed the unlock button. I felt him getting closer. I broke into a run. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. He was right there, standing just outside my window, his face obscured by the hood. And then, he smiled. Not a normal smile, not a friendly smile, something twisted, like he enjoyed this. My chest heaved as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it into gear. He tilted his head like he was amused. Then he turned. Walked 2 cars over, opened the door, got inside. A wave of nausea rolled through me as my headlights hit his vehicle. He was in a black sedan, no plates. He had been waiting for me. I threw the car into reverse. My tires screeched as I peeled out of the parking space, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. He followed. The headlights stayed close, tailing me as I sped out of the lot and onto the empty streets. I took a turn, so did he. Another, still there. I pressed the gas pedal harder, the speedometer creeping higher, but every time I checked the mirror, he was still there. Why? What did he want? I didn't want to go home. I couldn't. I needed to lose him. Up ahead, the traffic light turned yellow. I floored it. The intersection blurred past as the light turned red behind me. I looked in the mirror. He had stopped. Just sitting there at the red light, his car idling, headlights glowing. I turned down another road, then another, my breath ragged, my hands white-knuckling the wheel. My chest ached from holding my breath. After 5 minutes, I pulled into a gas station, hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. I checked the rearview mirror. The road was empty. He was gone. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm my racing heart. Then, just as I started to relax, a car drove past on the road ahead, a black sedan. The driver's head turned toward me as it passed. I didn't see his face, but I didn't have to. I knew. It was him. He hadn't stopped. He was still watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked to my car after a shift, I scanned the parking lot, expecting to see that black sedan lurking just out of sight. I stopped going to Brightmart alone, started carrying pepper spray in my purse, double-checked the locks on my apartment door. But paranoia only keeps you safe for so long. And sometimes, the worst moments don't happen to you, they happen to the people you love. I had no idea that Bethany Mills was about to have a night she'd never forget. She was like any other exhausted single mother, trying to balance work and raising a 4-year-old while keeping her life from completely falling apart. Grocery shopping was just another chore on an endless to-do list, something she squeezed in between picking Lucas up from daycare and trying to get him into bed at a reasonable hour. That night, ShopMart was mostly empty, the way she liked it. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whoosh, and the blast of air conditioning hit her face as she pushed a cart inside, Lucas skipping beside her. His little sneakers lit up with every step, the flashing LEDs a tiny beacon in the dimly lit store. Bethany knew the routine by heart. Produce first, frozen last, get in, get out. Lucas, as always, had other plans. "Mommy, can we go to the toy aisle?" he asked, his big brown eyes filled with excitement. Bethany sighed, glancing at her watch. "Just for a minute, okay? Then we have to get groceries." Lucas didn't wait for her to finish. He bolted ahead, giggling as he ran toward the brightly colored aisles stacked with action figures and dolls. Bethany followed, pushing the cart slowly behind him, her mind drifting to all the things she had to do once they got home. Bills to pay, laundry, dishes still in the sink. She barely noticed when Lucas disappeared. It was only when the aisle fell completely silent that she looked up from her grocery list, her stomach twisted. Lucas? No answer. She left the cart where it was and moved fast, scanning the surrounding aisles. Lucas? Sweetie? Still nothing. Panic clawed its way up her throat. He couldn't have gone far. He never wandered off like this. She turned a corner, checking between the shelves, her breath coming quicker now. Then, giggles, faint but unmistakable. Bethany's heart stuttered with relief as she followed the sound, stepping into the next aisle. And then she saw her. A woman was crouched beside Lucas, holding his hand. Bethany froze. Lucas didn't look scared. He was staring up at the woman with innocent curiosity, as if she had simply been another friendly stranger in the store. But there was something about the woman's posture, the way she whispered something to him, that made Bethany's skin crawl. She was older, maybe in her late 40s or early 50s, with stringy brown hair that fell messily around her face. Her clothes were loose and faded, her skin pale and stretched too tightly over sharp cheekbones. But it was her eyes that made Bethany's stomach turn. They were empty. Completely, utterly empty. Bethany forced herself to move. "Lucas, come here," she said, her voice steady but too sharp. The woman didn't react. Bethany took a step closer, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Excuse me, I have him now." Finally, the woman turned her head, slowly, like she had to think about it first. She smiled, a thin, lifeless curve of her lips. "He's such a sweet boy," she murmured. Her voice was soft, too soft, like she was talking to herself. Bethany reached for Lucas's hand, pulling him toward her. The woman didn't resist at first. Then, for just a second, she held on too tight. Bethany yanked Lucas away, stepping back, her pulse racing. "Thank you," she said stiffly, her entire body on edge. "But we have to go now." The woman just stood there, watching. Lucas looked up at Bethany, confused. "Mommy, she said she liked my shoes." Bethany didn't respond. She just grabbed the cart and hurried toward checkout, her heart hammering in her chest. The entire time, she could feel the woman's eyes on her. Bethany tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just some lonely woman who had no idea how unsettling she seemed. But as they reached the front of the store, Bethany glanced toward the exit doors, and her breath caught in her throat. The woman was already there. She was standing just inside the entrance, watching them leave. Bethany's hands clenched around the cart handle, her mind screaming at her to move faster. She rushed through self-checkout, barely registering the motions, her fingers trembling as she grabbed the receipt. Lucas was still happily talking about the toy aisle, oblivious to the way his mother's body was practically vibrating with fear. She took his hand and walked as fast as she could toward the sliding doors, and then, just as she was about to step outside, the woman moved. Bethany jerked back, pulling Lucas behind her as the woman stepped into her path. "You don't have to be rude," she said. Bethany's blood ran cold. The woman tilted her head slightly, that strange, empty smile still stretched across her face. "I was just being friendly." Bethany's throat tightened. "We need to go." The woman's eyes flickered to Lucas, and for a split second, Bethany saw something behind them. Something dark, something hungry. "You're very lucky," the woman whispered. Bethany felt her entire body lock up. She forced herself to push past, her heart racing as she yanked the door open and stepped outside. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She reached the car, shoved the groceries into the back seat, and buckled Lucas in as fast as she could. Only when she was inside, doors locked, engine running, did she finally turn her head. The woman was still standing at the exit, still smiling, and then she raised her hand and waved. Bethany's breath hitched. She threw the car into reverse, peeling out of the parking lot so fast the tires screeched against the pavement. She didn't stop driving until they were home. She double-checked every lock. She checked on Lucas 3 times while he slept, just to make sure he was still there, and even then she didn't sleep, because the woman's words kept playing over and over in her head. "You're very lucky. Lucky, 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 lucky. Bethany never went back to Shop Mart again, but some nights when she was home alone, she swore she saw a shadow standing at the end of her driveway, just standing there, watching. I wish I could say Bethany's story was the last strange thing to happen at Shop Mart, that it was just some isolated, creepy encounter, but it wasn't. Something was wrong with that store. I don't know if it was the store itself or the people who found their way inside it late at night, but every time I heard a new story, a man lurking in the aisles, a woman who wouldn't let go of a child, a shadow that didn't belong to anyone, it felt like something was building, something waiting to snap. And Daniel Reeves? He was the one who got too close to whatever it was. Daniel had been working at Shop Mart for almost a year. The night shifts weren't great, but they paid a little extra and it was quiet. Most of the time, the only people in the store after midnight were other employees and a handful of insomniacs looking for snacks or cigarettes. Most nights, Daniel killed time stocking shelves, helping the occasional customer, or scrolling on his phone at the customer service desk. Most nights, it was boring. That night wasn't most nights. He noticed the man just after 2 a.m. At first, he didn't think much of it. A tall guy, mid-40s, wearing a long brown coat. He was pushing a cart with nothing in it, wandering the aisles without direction. Daniel had seen plenty of weird customers before. Drunk guys looking for beer, people talking to themselves, old men staring too long at the frozen pizzas. But something about this man set him on edge. It was the way he moved. He wasn't shopping, he wasn't browsing, he was pacing. Back and forth through the aisles, always in the same pattern. Aisle 7, aisle 8, aisle 9, then back again. Never picking anything up, never stopping. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching him on the security monitors. The cameras weren't the best, grainy, black and white, weird static lines flickering at the edges, but the man's movements looked even stranger on screen. Too slow, too deliberate. Daniel's stomach tightened. He told himself he was just being paranoid, until the man looked up at the camera and smiled. A slow, stretched grin, teeth too white, too perfect. Daniel felt his pulse jump. He stepped away from the monitor, suddenly uneasy. That was when he realized the man had stopped pacing. He was standing completely still in aisle 9, hands clutching the handle of his empty cart, head slightly tilted, facing the security camera, facing Daniel. Daniel swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. The store felt wrong now. Too big, too empty. The hum of the overhead lights too loud, like white noise pressing against his skull. Then the man moved again, not in the direction he had been walking before. This time, he was coming toward the front of the store. Daniel stepped back, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. His brain scrambled for something rational, something to ground him. Maybe the guy just needed help, maybe he had a question. But some deep, instinctive part of him, the part that had kept his ancestors alive when they were still running from things in the dark, was screaming at him to move. Daniel didn't wait. He turned on his heel and walked, fast, toward the break room. Behind him, the automatic doors leading to the back offices slid open, releasing a gust of stale, cold air. He didn't look back, didn't check the monitors, didn't want to see how close the man had gotten. He pushed through the break room door, heart pounding, and slammed it shut behind him, locked it. Then, silence. Daniel exhaled, trying to slow his breathing. Maybe he had overreacted, maybe the guy was just weird, maybe... Tap. Daniel's stomach dropped. The sound was right outside the door. Tap, tap, like fingernails against wood. Daniel backed away, his entire body tensed, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Then, a voice, low, raspy, right on the other side of the door. "I've been watching you." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His legs wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped. Then, the doorknob twisted. Daniel launched himself backward, knocking over a chair. The door rattled against the lock. Then, silence. Daniel stood there, frozen, every nerve in his body screaming. Then he heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking away from the door. Daniel waited, waited. until the footsteps faded into the store. His shaking fingers fumbled for his phone. He called security, his voice a barely controlled whisper. "There's a man in the store. He tried to get into the break room. He didn't even know how to explain it. Security told him they were on their way." Daniel didn't move, didn't unlock the door. He just stood there, staring at the handle, waiting for it to turn again. It never did. By the time security arrived, the man was gone. They checked the cameras, but there was nothing there. No one in aisle 9, no one near the break room, no one, like he had never been there at all. Daniel didn't argue, didn't push it. He just nodded, let them do their rounds, let them pretend like nothing had happened. He finished his shift, hands still shaking as he counted out the register, closed up the store, stepped out into the cold, empty parking lot. He got into his car, locked the doors, started the engine, checked the rearview mirror, and then he saw it. Standing at the edge of the parking lot, just outside the reach of the streetlights, a figure, still, silent, watching. Daniel peeled out of the parking lot so fast his tires screeched. He didn't stop driving until he was miles away. Didn't look at the rearview mirror again. Didn't sleep when he got home. Didn't go back to work the next night. Because he knew. He knew that man wasn't just some random customer. He wasn't just a weirdo in the aisles. He was something else. And whatever he wasn't finished with Daniel yet. I heard stories about that night shift worker, Daniel Reeves, the one who swore he locked himself in the break room to escape a man who was nowhere to be found on security footage. Small towns talk, and stories like that don't stay secret for long. I'd be lying if I said it didn't make my skin crawl, imagining someone or something stalking the aisles of an all-night store. The tale fluttered around my thoughts as I pulled into the parking lot of Evergreen Supermarket at 5 in the morning. I was on my way to pick up a haul that had me driving clear across the state, and I needed snacks, coffee, anything to keep me awake on those endless highways. Truth be told, I almost didn't stop. After hearing about Daniel's ordeal, I considered driving on to the next town just to avoid any potential weirdness. But I was exhausted, my eyes heavy from too many hours behind the wheel, and the bright lights of Evergreen Supermarket seemed oddly comforting. I parked my rig near the back, the only spot spacious enough, and trudged toward the entrance. The automatic doors hissed open, and a blast of chilled air rushed out, carrying the distinctive smell of cleaning solution and stale donuts from the bakery. My boots squeaked on the glossy tiles. The place was practically deserted, exactly how I like it. Fewer people to navigate around, fewer lines, less small talk. Most folks at this hour tended to be retirees or bleary-eyed travelers like me, but as I pushed my cart down the main aisle, I realized it was even emptier than usual. Not a single other customer in sight. I could see a clerk at one of the far registers, head down, fiddling with something beneath the counter. No other employees, no overnight stalkers, just an eerily quiet store, lit by the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I grabbed a bag of chips, a couple of microwave meals I could heat at the next truck stop, and some cheap instant coffee. I was trying to keep my mind focused on the mundane, but there was an itch at the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. I kept thinking about those rumors. The strange watchers, the stalkers in hoodies, the ghostly figures caught between the aisles. It was ridiculous to feel uneasy, yet I felt the hairs on my arms stand up anyway. That primal warning that makes your heart beat just a little bit faster. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to hearing too many scary stories. I turned into the frozen food aisle and paused, glancing up at the fluorescent sign marked Frozen Entries. The row stretched before me. Dozens of freezer doors reflecting my tired face back at me, the glass slightly fogged with condensation. It should have been nothing special, just me and the hum of the refrigerators, and yet, something felt off. The overhead bulbs flickered, just once, but long enough for me to notice. I told myself it was just a power fluctuation. Happens all the time, right? Still, the flicker sent a jolt of tension through me. I stepped toward the freezers, scanning the options for any cheap dinners that would fit in my tiny microwave oven rigged up in the cab of my truck. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It sounded almost like someone gently rapping their knuckles against glass. I froze, my gaze sweeping across the row of freezer doors. "Hello?" I said, my voice echoing down the empty aisle. No one answered. The tapping stopped for a moment, replaced by that heavy hush you only get in a deserted store at dawn. My mind started spinning scenarios. Maybe a piece of ice was stuck in a fan, or some broken machinery was making that noise. Still, my nerves prickled. I took a few cautious steps, pushing my cart ahead of me like a shield. Then the tapping resumed, louder now, more insistent, tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from one of the freezers on my left. I turned slowly, my pulse picking up speed, and leaned toward the glass. On the other side, the glass was fogged with condensation, but I could make out packages of frozen pizza and bags of vegetables stacked behind it. Nothing that should be making a noise like that. "Weird," I muttered, leaning closer. That's when I saw them. Two pale hands pressed flat against the inside of the freezer door, as though someone were trapped inside. Their palms splayed, slender fingers curled slightly against the glass. I let out a startled yelp and stumbled back, nearly knocking over my cart. My heart pounded against my ribcage. I blinked, certain I had to be hallucinating, but when I looked again, those hands were still there, pressed firmly against the glass. They looked almost translucent, unnaturally pale, like skin leached of color. And then, as abruptly as they appeared, they were gone. The glass was empty once more, just a frost-covered window into the freezer. My mind struggled to catch up. "What the—" I started, but my voice trailed off. I wanted to believe I was just tired, that I'd dozed off at the wheel earlier and was seeing things, but I couldn't shake the image of those hands out of my head. My skin crawled. I inched forward, one trembling hand reaching out. The door handle felt cold beneath my fingers. Slowly, I pulled the door open. A gust of icy air spilled out, and I peered inside. Frozen pizzas, boxes of potato waffles, bags of broccoli florets. Everything you'd expect in a freezer. No sign of anyone. Certainly not a living, breathing person. I exhaled a shaky breath, releasing the tension in my shoulders. Then I heard it again, that same tapping noise, but now it was coming from farther down the aisle. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Leaving the door ajar, I grabbed my cart and inched along, my eyes scanning each freezer window. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone was taunting me, moving just ahead, urging me to follow. With each step, I felt dread pooling in my stomach. The aisle seemed longer, the lights harsher, the hume of the freezers deafening. Finally, about 3 doors down, I saw another flicker of movement behind the glass. My breath caught. This time, I didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open, half expecting to see those pale hands again, maybe even a face. But all I saw were cardboard boxes of fish sticks. A wave of cold air rushed out, almost stinging my cheeks. Nothing but the usual frozen goods. My mind was racing. Something was definitely wrong here, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I told myself I'd had enough, that I should just grab what I needed and go, but a part of me couldn't leave yet. I needed to know if I was truly losing my mind. I gripped the cart's handle and hurried down the aisle, trying not to look at the reflection of my own frightened face in the freezer door. I turned the corner toward the bakery, planning to get to the checkout as fast as possible. But just as I reached the end of the aisle, I heard it again, louder, more forceful, as though something was pounding on the glass with both fists now. Tap, 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 tap. No, more like thud, thud, thud. My heart lurched. Against my better judgment, I glanced over my shoulder. Far behind me, near the spot I'd just left, one of the freezer doors was visibly rattling, shaking under the force of those unseen blows. My eyes widened, adrenaline surging, and I started to run, pushing the cart in front of me. I couldn't deal with this, not alone, not in a store that seemed devoid of any other human being. I passed by the bakery, by the aisles of cereal and canned soups, my footsteps echoing in that dreadful emptiness. My breath was ragged, my mind conjuring images of ghostly hands bursting out of the freezer to drag me in. I spotted a single open register where a bored-looking cashier in a green vest was fiddling with her phone. She glanced up as I careened toward her, eyes widening at the sight of my panicked expression. "Sir, are you—" she began, but I cut her off. "There's something— I don't know, someone in the freezer aisle," I gasped, trying to keep my voice low so I wouldn't sound like a complete lunatic. She just stared at me. You sure? Yes, I'm sure, I snapped, then tried to soften my tone. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but something is banging on the glass. It looked like hands. Her face went pale and she glanced around nervously. No one else is working right now. The morning stock crew isn't in yet. I'm basically here alone until 6. She seemed just as uneasy as I was. Do you want me to call someone? I nodded vigorously. Yes, please. While she picked up the store phone to dial a manager or maybe security, I frantically unloaded my items onto the conveyor belt, my eyes flicking toward the far end of the store. I half expected to see those pale hands creeping around a corner, but the store remained still, silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. The cashier hung up the phone, swallowing hard. I can't get a hold of anyone. The system's down maybe. I just got static. My stomach clenched. Perfect. No backup, no help. I shoved a couple of bills into her hand, not even waiting for change. Forget it, just let me pay and get out of here. She nodded, eyes darting nervously to the empty aisles behind me. Within moments, the transaction was done, and I snatched up my bag. My cart's wheels squeaked as I hurried toward the automatic door. For a split second, the exit seemed agonizingly slow to open, as though it were stalling. But I pushed through, stepping into the cool morning air that was still tinted with the last shadows of night. My truck loomed at the edge of the parking lot, a welcome sight. I practically ran to it, tossing my groceries onto the passenger seat before climbing in and slamming the door. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, and I put the truck in gear, glancing up at the glass storefront. And that was when I saw it. A faint reflection in the doors themselves. It looked like a silhouette standing inside the store, something tall and slender, its form warped by the glass. The figure was unnaturally still, like a statue carved out of shadow. For a heartbeat, I stared, unwilling to believe what I was seeing. Then it moved, just slightly, as though leaning closer to the glass to watch me leave. The automatic doors didn't open, they remained tightly shut, as if the figure made no effort to pass through them. A shiver ran down my spine. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal, my tires squealing as I pulled out of the lot. I didn't breathe easy until I was miles down the highway. Even then, my mind kept replaying the vision of those hands pressed against the freezer door, the relentless tapping that echoed down the aisle, and the silhouette at the front of the store. It felt like I'd escaped something worse than just a bad dream. I spent the rest of the drive choking down coffee and trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a mechanical glitch with the freezers. Maybe I was overtired, seeing illusion, but deep down I knew better. Whatever was in that freezer aisle, whatever pounded on the glass and showed its pale fingers, was real enough to scare me half to death. By the time the sun rose fully, I was well on my way to my destination, the supermarket far behind me, yet somehow I couldn't shake the sense that I'd left something unfinished, like I'd glimpsed just a corner of something much bigger and darker lurking in the shadows of those aisles. As I downed another gulp of coffee, I glanced in the side mirror and thought I saw a pale blur near the back of my truck, almost like a reflection. But when I looked again, it was gone, nothing but empty road behind me. I tried to laugh it off, but no sound came out of my dry throat. I just kept driving, telling myself that once I made my delivery, I'd never step foot in another all-night grocery store again. And yet, part of me knew that was a lie, because there are things you can't run from, things that stay with you no matter how many miles of asphalt you put between yourself and the place where you first saw them. And as the dawn broke across the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that those pale hands, that silent silhouette, might just be the beginning of a nightmare I'd carry with me wherever I went. I heard about Mark Holloway's story from one of the daytime cashiers, the one who clocks in right as I'm heading out. She said he was a truck driver who came in early one morning, rattled and pale as a ghost, mumbling about hands in the freezer aisle and something staring at him through the doors. I almost laughed it off, figuring it was another tall tale that floated around small towns like ours, but the look on her face told me she believed every word. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I mean, people say all sorts of weird stuff about these stores after hours, how the neon lights and the empty aisles mess with your head. But I couldn't shake this unsettled feeling, a nagging sense that something about her story was true, that something was off about this place. And I guess I should have trusted my instincts, because the night I got assigned to cart retrieval was the night everything changed for me. I'm 19, just out of high school, and this is my first real job. Nothing fancy, just pushing carts and bagging groceries at a little supermarket on the edge of town, the kind that has flickering lights in the parking lot and a tired manager who's seen it all. Working late never bothered me before. I've always been a night owl, the kind of person who does better under a moonlit sky. But that particular night, I arrived for my shift around 9, with the sky already pitch black except for a few stubborn stars fighting through the haze of the overhead lamps. I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I ignored it. If I didn't punch in, I couldn't pay my phone bill, so I forced a smile and headed inside. The shift started as usual. I helped bag groceries, organized shelves, answered a few random questions about where to find canned tomatoes. Eventually, my manager told me to go gather the stray carts drifting around the lot. It was close to midnight by then, and the store was quiet. Too quiet. Most of the employees had gone home, leaving just me, my manager, and one sleepy cashier. The moment I stepped outside, I noticed how dark the corners of the parking lot were. The overhead lights were there, but they cast long shadows that seemed to sway with the breeze, making me feel like I wasn't alone out there. The asphalt gleamed with a faint sheen, a reminder of the drizzle that had fallen earlier in the evening. I tried to shake off my nerves, telling myself it was just an ordinary parking lot. So I grabbed the big metal hook we used to round up carts and started walking around, collecting them one by one, listening to the soft rumble of wheels on concrete. The night air was cool on my arms, and I remember thinking that maybe I should have brought a jacket. Then again, I was always moving, so I stayed warm enough. Eventually, I gathered a decent train of carts and began pushing them back toward the store entrance. That was when I heard a second squeaking noise, like another set of cartwheels rolling behind me. At first, I smiled, thinking maybe my manager had come out to help me. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see another line of carts. Nothing was there. The parking lot stretched out, empty except for a few scattered cars. I laughed under my breath, chalking it up to an echo, or maybe my own footsteps reverberating in the stillness. But the moment I resumed pushing, I heard it again. Wheels turning in sync with mine, following my lead like an unseen shadow. My skin prickled. I stopped abruptly, and the squeaking sound stopped too, just a half second out of time, like something realized it needed to mimic me. A breeze drifted across my face, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt and something else I couldn't name, something stale and vaguely metallic. I spun around, scanning the darkness, heart pounding. No movement, no silhouette, nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid and continued forward, forcing my legs to move. That's when I heard it. A sudden slam, like a shopping cart crashing into a metal pole. The sound echoed across the lot, bouncing off the walls of the store, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned so fast I almost tripped over the line of carts in front of me. My eyes darted around, searching for the source of the crash. Nothing. No overturned cart, no sign of an accident. I stood there, breathing hard, the lonely echo of that slam still ringing in my ears. My heartbeat pounded against my ribcage. Something was off. My instincts screamed at me to get inside, to leave the straggling carts for the morning shift. But some stubborn sense of duty, plus the knowledge I'd probably get chewed out if I left the job half-finished, kept me there. I decided to do one last sweep, just to confirm I hadn't missed any carts. With a trembling hand, I slid my phone out of my pocket to check the time. 12:07 a.m. I made my way toward the far edges of the lot, near a broken street lamp that flickered every couple of seconds, casting weird, jerky shadows across the ground. The handful of cars parked there belonged to employees who were staying late. Beyond the rows of vehicles lay an expanse of darkness that merged into a line of trees. Occasionally, a passing car on the road behind the store would throw light across the lot, but otherwise it felt like I was alone on an island surrounded by night, and that was when I saw it. A shape, a figure standing near the entrance doors. At first, I thought it might be my manager, but this shape was too tall, too still, like a statue carved from the very darkness. My heart gave a lurch. I shouted, "Hello?" My voice rang out, but the figure didn't move, didn't respond. The flickering light from the broken lamp revealed nothing more than a vague outline, arms at its sides, head slightly cocked, as though listening. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I could taste copper on my tongue, as if fear had a flavor. Somehow, I forced my legs to move, inching closer to the store. I couldn't stay out here, not with that thing silently observing me. Yet every step I took felt heavier, like wading through thick mud. The figure remained motionless, almost too perfect, as though it weren't flesh and blood at all. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks. But no, there it was, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the entrance lights. Then, as a car rolled past on the nearby street and momentarily illuminated the parking lot, I noticed something horrifying. The figure had no discernible features. No face, no color, just a void shaped like a person, absorbing the light around it. I let out an involuntary gasp, and that was enough to shatter my paralysis. I sprinted toward the sliding glass doors, pushing the carts with more force than necessary, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my chest. When I looked over my shoulder one last time, the figure was gone. Vanished. The parking lot stood empty, the broken lamp flickering like a dying firefly. A wave of nausea hit me. I didn't know what I'd just seen, but I knew I never wanted to see it again. I reached the doors, which slid open with that same lazy hiss, and practically collapsed inside, the warmth and fluorescent light hitting me like a lifeline. I shoved the carts into the corral near the entrance, panting, eyes still locked on the dark lot behind me, half expecting that silhouette to appear again. But there was nothing. I turned around, nearly bumping into the cashier from the express lane. He raised an eyebrow at my breathless state. "You all right?" he asked, concern flickering across his face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." For a second, I considered telling him everything, the squeaking carts, the unearthly figure by the door, but I could hardly wrap my own mind around it, let alone make it sound reasonable. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a shaky smile. "I just thought I heard something out there, might have been a stray dog or something." He didn't look convinced, but he shrugged and went back to scanning an old man's groceries. I backed away, trying to gather myself. The store felt alien, the fluorescent lights glaring too brightly, the aisle signs overhead swaying gently in the air-conditioned breeze. Maybe I was losing it, letting rumors and spooky stories get the better of me. Then I remembered that slam in the parking lot, the squeaking of those phantom cartwheels, and the shape that seemed to watch me from the shadows. No, I wasn't imagining things. My pulse was still racing. I glanced at the clock above the customer service desk. 12:15 a.m. Funny how that was the same hour that truck driver Mark claimed to have seen those pale hands in the freezer. Or how Ethan Gray said a ragged man in the lot kept muttering about 12:15 being a good time. Suddenly, I wished I hadn't heard all those stories. I tried to keep busy for the next half hour, wiping down counters, double-checking supply closets, anything to stay in the brightly lit interior of the store. But the manager eventually poked his head in and asked me to finish clearing the lot, that we'd had another customer mention stray carts blocking a parking space. My stomach tightened. The last thing I wanted was to go back out there. But it was my job, and part of me didn't want to leave the store vulnerable if some creep was lurking around, so I summoned what little courage I had left and walked back through the automatic doors. The lot was eerily silent again, no flicker of movement except for a moth dancing around one of the overhead lamps. I forced myself to breathe steadily, scanning for any sign of that dark silhouette. Nothing. Gathering my resolve, I hurried over to the far corner where one lonely cart sat tilted against the curb. I grabbed it, my heart hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. That's when the overhead lamp above me gave a violent buzz and went out, plunging the corner of the lot into near darkness. I let out a sharp cry, stumbling forward in sudden panic. In that split second, I felt a presence behind me, as if someone were standing inches away, breathing down my neck. The cart slipped from my grasp, the metal clattering onto the pavement. I spun around, fists clenched, expecting to see someone looming there. Nobody, just the empty lot. My shoulders sagged with relief, but my body was still trembling with residual fear. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone's flashlight, flicking it on. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing only puddles of streetlight and my abandoned cart. I reached for it, deciding enough was enough. But then, I felt a tug on the handle, like someone was yanking it from the other side. A wave of cold terror rippled through me. I shone the flashlight over the cart, expecting to see hands pulling at it. Nothing there. The handle jerked again, almost wrenching free of my grip, and I let out a strangled yelp. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone. It clattered on the ground, and for a moment I lost sight of the cart in the darkness. When I picked my phone up, the cart was standing still again, as if it had never moved at all. My mind reeled. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed the handle with all my strength and dragged it toward the store, not caring if I scratched the asphalt or bashed into a parked car. I just wanted to be inside, under the lights, around other people. The final yards to the door felt like a mile. Every second I expected to hear that squeak behind me or see that faceless shape looming in my peripheral vision. By the time I reached the entrance, my lungs ached from breathing so hard. I rushed in, the doors sliding shut behind me, sealing out that dark emptiness. I must have looked deranged because the cashier gawked at me as I wrestled the cart into the corral. Before he could say anything, I sprinted to the manager's office, my heart rattling in my chest. I told him I was feeling ill, too nauseous to work. He took one look at my ashen face and waved me off, mumbling something about me clocking out early if I had to. I didn't hesitate. I tore off my apron, tossed it on a nearby chair, and practically ran out the back exit to avoid crossing the parking lot again. From there, I cut around the side of the building, hopped into my old sedan, and peeled out of the lot like the devil was on my tail. As I drove home, my hands shook on the wheel. Everything Mark said about that tapping in the freezer, everything Bethany said about that unblinking woman, everything Ethan said about that ragged figure, they all came crashing together in my mind like pieces of a puzzle. Something unnatural lurked in these late-night grocery store shadows, and it wasn't going away. I don't know what I saw out there, or who or what tried to rip that cart from my hands, but I do know that I'll never forget the way it felt. A suffocating sense of being watched by something that didn't belong in our world. And as I turned onto the main road, headlights illuminating the silent outskirts of our small town, I promised myself I wouldn't go back. Not for all the paychecks in the world. But a sliver of me suspected that this place and its shadows had sunk their claws into me. That no matter where I went, I'd never truly outrun whatever I'd encountered. Because once you lock eyes with the darkness that lurks in the corners of those empty parking lots, it never really lets you go. These 6 unsettling tales, all set against the backdrop of grocery stores at strange hours, may seem like random nightmares stitched together, but they share a simple, resonant truth. Everyday places can hide extraordinary darkness. Whether it's a late-night shopper being stalked by a ragged stranger, a single mother discovering someone's eerie fixation on her child, or an unsuspecting truck driver confronting pale hands tapping on the other side of frosted glass, each story reminds us of one essential lesson. Our instincts matter. We often dismiss those prickling feelings at the back of our necks, the subtle tightening in our chests, or the inexplicable rush of dread that makes us want to lock the car door and hurry home. But more often than not, those instincts are warning signs that something is off. When Ethan couldn't shake the sense of being watched, he was right to trust his gut and run. When Jessica decided not to confront the hoodie-wearing stranger, she saved herself from a more dangerous encounter. And when Bethany yanked her son away from a woman who lingered too long, she acted on pure maternal instinct and likely prevented a nightmare scenario. These stories also show us that we're never truly alone. Sometimes we wish we were, but in dimly lit parking lots and deserted aisles, eyes can be lurking just out of sight. For some, like Daniel, a night shift job might seem mundane until an eerie figure appears in the aisle, whispering, "I've been watching you." For Mark, a routine grocery run at dawn became a surreal nightmare when those ghostly hands appeared behind the freezer door. And for Melissa, what was meant to be a simple task, gathering carts under the flickering lamps, turned into an unforgettable confrontation with something that defied explanation. All of these unsettling moments teach us a profound respect for the unpredictable nature of the world around us. They remind us to stay vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to reach out for help when the darkness feels too close. They encourage us not to let fear rule our lives, but to keep our eyes open, remain prepared, and remember that even in the most ordinary places, unsettling truths might lie in wait. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey through the uncharted corners of our everyday world. I'm truly grateful for your support and for lending your ears and imaginations to these stories. Every like, share, and comment keeps Enigma of the Unknown alive, helping us delve deeper into the shadows and bring you more haunting tales. So stay cautious out there, trust your instincts when something seems off, and remember, sometimes it's in the aisles of our local supermarket or the stillness of a dark parking lot that we see just how fragile the boundary between normal and nightmare really is. Until next time, keep your eyes open, stay safe, and thank you again for being part of this strange and thrilling journey.